businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Today, we remember. We remember the 102 minutes the tower stood burning, and we remember the 12 seconds they took to fall. We remember the ultimate sacrifice made by the 2,996 people on that fateful day at the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Among them were 343 New York City firefighters, 23 New York City police officers, 37 Port Authority police officers, and 11 emergency medical service members. We add to that total over 7,000 armed forces service members who perished in Afghanistan and Iraq while bravely waging the continuous fight against terrorism. We remember the bravery of the 40 passengers and crew members aboard United Flight 93 who rose up against their hijackers, and even though they met a tragic end in a Pennsylvania field, their actions prevented further death and destruction. We remember it all. Today we stand together to show our appreciation for each other, for our partnerships, for each other, for our partnerships across the world, for our way of life, and for the enduring legacy of peace and freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to introduce Mr. Charles Blake, Deputy Fire Chief, New York City Fire Department, retired, who would like to share his personal experiences as one of the first chief officers on scene of the World Trade Center disaster.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor, distinguished guests. You certainly have added new meaning to "We Never Forget." I'm very taken by this. The other thing you have to allow me to catch my breath is the bagpipes. That's a traditional send-off in our fire department. So, once again, thank you for never forgetting. I'd like to talk about a few things that were actually positive that day, as opposed to all the disaster and horror that was around. I come from the borough of Staten Island, which is the smallest, least populated borough in New York City. At that time, we had about 400,000 people living there. Of the 343 firefighters who perished, 94 came from my neighborhood. The other thing you should keep in the back of your mind is that South Tower collapsed 56 minutes after the plane hit it. Not much time to straighten out your affairs. I was home when the towers got hit. My brother's a battalion chief. He's actually the commander of that area in Manhattan. He picked me up. We went down to the Staten Island Ferry, which is the only direct way into Manhattan. And we proceeded with a group of police officers and firefighters, mostly off-duty, going in to help. The Staten Island Ferry, they're fairly large boats. They can hold 3,000 or 4,000 people, and at that time they were taking cars and trucks on board. We got halfway across the bay. It's a 5-mile trip. Halfway across when the first tower came down, the first tower being the South Tower. That caused a moment of sadness. My brother's son was a fireman in that building. The good news is he survived. We don't know how, but he did. We pulled in closer to the slip as the second building came down, the North Tower. The ferry captain, God bless him, somehow managed to dock the boat, get everybody off. There must easily be 1,000 citizens waiting to get on the boat to get out of Manhattan. It was very humbling because they clapped for us. We worked our way in through what was called Battery Park. A contractor there handed us all sorts of tools. As an aside, I know many of you know contractors, they don't give out tools, but he was very generous. Our next stop, a few thousand feet further, we bumped into the second piece of the field communications unit where we got our radios, and they informed me a lieutenant who I knew was calling in saying he was trapped in the building. And they said, "Don't, we told him you're on the way, Chief, you'll get him out." That'll cause you to reflect for a few minutes. Fortunately, he got out before I got there because we had no idea how we were going to get him out. We went up a protected street away from the building as we worked north, and we bumped into the chief medical officer who handled lungs for the New York City Fire Department. I will date myself, but he looked like one of those shake and bake chickens where you just shake him up and the poor man was just covered with ash. He had a mask on though, and he said, "Get masks, get masks." That saved me. We went to every ambulance that was abandoned there and pulled out every mask we could, gave it to the police, gave it to the fire, gave it to anyone that needed a mask. With that, we made the turn onto Liberty Street, and there's where the scene unfolded. Liberty and West. If I were an artist, I would stop and start painting it. Totally still. There was smoke and fire around. The buildings that were burning were on the other side, the east side of the area. There were birds chirping. It was a surreal scene. As I advanced, a civilian came running up and identified himself as the building engineer. He handed me 110 pages of building plans, floor plans. Not to be brash, I basically threw away the 110 floors and wanted to know what was going on in the underfloors, the subterranean floors where the basement, where the cars were parked. We believed perhaps that's where we could find some victims. Of course, we still had no water at this point. All the hydrants were destroyed on West Street, if we could even find them. Then he gave me another thing to think about. He said, "You have to get down to the river and close the valve." What are you talking about? Well, the World Trade Center was built in perhaps the world's largest bathtub. Because of so many streams and creeks and everything else, they had continual pumps going, pumping the water into the Hudson River. Obviously now the pumps had stopped, and there was no back valve on this. We had to go down and manually shut that valve. I sent a company with them to do that. Hopefully that would save anyone from drowning that was still alive in the subterranean area. Then just as that was settling down, up walks a man, sort of in a uniform, but I couldn't quite figure out what the uniform was. He said, "Chief, the Harvey's ready to pump." The Harvey's a fireboat. We sold that a decade ago. What is that doing here? And he said, "No, a bunch of fire buffs have put it together. We're low on fuel and we have no hose." I said, "I have plenty of hose, and once again, I had to find my Office of Emergency Management rep. That poor fellow also looked like a shake and bake victim. And he was able to get a fuel lighter to them. The Harvey pumped for the next 3 days, providing most of the water where we were operating, provided water to the tower ladders. Now we could start to put water and start to cool down the steel so we could start to advance in and start doing some searching. While this was going on, more and more firefighters started to arrive in the area. We were sort of an isolated area. You couldn't get to us from the north. You couldn't get to us too well from the east. You had to come around the end of Manhattan. While this was going on, we started establishing commands. The way the building fell, it actually established 4 distinct areas. Since in the replanning of the fire department under Mayor Giuliani, they had eliminated most of the staff positions. It went from 30 staff chiefs to 8, and most of those were killed that day. So we, the deputy chiefs, assumed command, and you know each name. Nick, you got the north, you got the east, you got the southeast, and we just proceeded that way. But now we started losing control. Firefighters started arriving, and one thing, you can't stop a firefighter from going to fire. We were starting to lose control. And with that, Chief Hayden, who was the 1st Division Chief, who actually was inside the building when it started to go down, he somehow surfaced, saw what was going on. I handed him a megaphone. I have no idea where I got the megaphone from, the bullhorn. He climbed on the back of a wrecked rig and said, called everyone to attention, and asked for a moment of silence to remember all we had lost. It was totally brilliant. It restored order. We started to make our assignments, make up details, putting firefighters together so we don't lose any more. deciding where we were going to go. I was trying to figure out what this map actually meant that I'd been handed. With that, who comes wandering by but my 82-year-old father, retired battalion chief. He was looking for his old company, which was crushed right in front of us, so he saw that and left. We had to escort some other senior chiefs that had retired many years ago. They were looking for their sons, their nephews. We had to get them off the pile. It was a hazardous place to be. So it was getting late. I was getting pretty tired. Another deputy chief came to relieve me. And with that, I saw on the corner of my eye a contractor, and he was waving to me, and I went over to him. He said, "Chief, you're going to need light here tonight." I said, "Yeah, it's getting dark." And he said, "I can light this place up like Yankee Stadium. Just sign this piece of paper." Which I did, and God bless him, they've never caught up with me yet to pay for those lights. So I'll leave you with this. As I left, there was light. There was light on a horrible scene. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deputy Fire Chief Deutsch. In the past, as first responders began their tour of duty, it was the bell that signaled the beginning of that day's shift. Throughout the day and night, each alarm was sounded by a bell, which summoned these brave souls to place their lives in jeopardy. When a first responder had died in the line of duty, it was a mournful toll of that bell that solemnly announced the comrade's passing. To symbolize the devotion of these brave souls had for their duty, a special signal of 3 rings, 3 times each, represents the end of our comrades' duties and that they will be returning to quarters. So we offer this tradition today in a moment of silent reflection. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's ceremony. On behalf of the over 10,000 Americans that lost their lives since that most infamous day, we thank you for attending.
Did you hear the Lieutenant Governor speak?
No, I did not.